Okay, wrestling fans, this is your heritage, this is your lineage, this is the Great American Bash, 1988, and I was there. I was in the attendance of that arena, Baltimore, Maryland. Until recently, the venue was being called the Baltimore Civic Center. But for this 88 Bash, I can say that I think we were calling it the Baltimore Arena by then. At the Crockett Cup 87, I think it was called the Baltimore Civic Center, but by now it's the Baltimore Arena. And, you know, I could just do the typical rewind the matches and analyze the matches, but as you've come to know me, or you're getting to know me, Mike Messier, wrestling fan, storyteller, I thought I'd tell you a story. And I try to keep this close to the bone, okay? So I was a young man, but, you know, my parents did not particularly get along very well. And part of the situation for me as a child was most of my summers were spent in New England, Rhode Island, okay? And as I got older, the novelty wore off. I was not appreciating going to Rhode Island for the summers. I did not enjoy it as much as I might have when I was younger. And I would protest because I was getting older, wanted to spend time with my friends, enjoy the summer vacation with my friends, and not be isolated in Rhode Island. And where I was growing up was the state of Virginia, which is how I saw these wonderful wrestling shows in the Baltimore Arena and the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland. So I remember, and now some of you who might have come from a divorced home might remember tactics like this. As a child of divorce, you kind of learn how to play the game, and you learn, or I did at least, or I taught myself, how to gently nudge or manipulate your parents against each other, because they're using you as a pawn, so you might as well play off of this and try to get whatever you can out of the situation. Now, I really did not want to go to Rhode Island that summer at all, but my mother insisted, and off I went. But the caveat to my displacement that summer was me kind of getting into my father's head, and my dad surprising me with a plane ticket back from Rhode Island for the weekend of the Great American Bash 1988. And I knew that going up to Rhode Island for the summer. So whatever the summer started, the vacation must have been June. And I knew that I would be back in town to meet my dad and meet my friends for this Great American Bash. Now, interestingly enough, when this came to fruition, I took this airplane by myself as a young man from Rhode Island to, I don't know if it was Dulles or National Airport, probably BWI. My father picked me up. I think we stayed in a hotel one night. Then the day of the bash, which I believe was a Sunday, my father took me to a baseball game, a Baltimore Orioles baseball game. And I want to say that they were still in Memorial Stadium at that time, that Camden Yards had not been built yet. So me and my dad go to a baseball game in the afternoon, go back to the hotel, and my dad said, okay, go, you got your ticket, you know where you're meeting your friends? And somehow, without cell phones, without whatever the fuck, I don't know if I had my ticket already, but my dad did not go to the Great American Bash. He was a mild wrestling fan. He was into it a little bit. But I met my friend Randy, our other friend Scott Nyberg, I'll tell you about him, and Randy's older sister, who I remember, she was kind of in charge of this routine. She was I don't know if she was 20 or 21, but she looked pretty good wearing an all-white outfit. And the running gag was that she looked like she might have been there for horseman activities. Although that was not true, it was just a joke on our part about her friend's sister. So then we get to the point, now the Scott Nyberg kid that went, we always referred to him as the Vince McMahon, that he looked like Vince McMahon, but he really didn't. In any type of Vince McMahon look-alike contest, he would have finished 3rd or 10th. But amongst us, he was the only person we knew that had black hair and looked somewhat like Vince McMahon as a young guy. Now, Mech, his sister, myself, and Nyber are kind of an interesting group of 4 people who never would ever, you know, do this again. So I guess Mech's sister drove him and Nyber, because we're all not old enough to drive yet. So we go to this fucking wrestling show, and we had pretty damn good seats. And maybe in the thumbnail I'll attach some photographs that I took of Dusty Rhodes, Barry Windham, the Tower of Doom, Arn Anderson jumping off the top rope. I'll try to insert that into the thumbnail. And the show begins. So the show, I think, started pretty early from my memory. Everything was just different back then. You didn't have these homogenized pay-per-view start times, like every pay-per-view has to start at 7 or 8 and blah, blah, blah. And that they're always a Sunday. I mean, pay-per-view was still getting its feet wet, especially WCW or NWA. Now this is where it gets really complicated, because these were really the last gasps of the NWA. And this Great American Bash card 1988 really is a tribute to the 4 horsemen, the golden era horsemen, as I like to call it, which was Ric Flair, Barry Windham, Tully Blanchard, and Arn Anderson. This was their night, okay? And shortly after this, even when we were in the arena at this show, there were rumors of the Jim Crockett Promotions, the Crockett family, selling out to Ted Turner. And though that would come into fruition by Starrcade 88. So really, and because most people didn't see Starrcade 87, which was a pay-per-view offering, but most people couldn't see it. Bunkhouse Stampede 88, most people couldn't see it. This Great American Bash 88 was available in a lot more homes, including in our suburban Virginia area. But we were there live, okay? So let's go through this goddamn show. You know, we were sitting there, the dark match, so to speak, was pretty not good. I think it was Ricky Santana. Was it Ricky Santana or Tim Horner and Kendall Windham versus Dick Murdoch and Rick Steiner? Just kind of a thrown together match of like 2 decent heels, Murdoch and Steiner, against kind of a jobber connection, you know, Kendall Windham, and I think it was Ricky Santana. Although I wouldn't be shocked if it was Tim Horner. I'm just kind of drawing a mental lapse right now. Not a great match, maybe 10 minutes, just guys wrestling a match, you know what I mean? I took too many pictures of that particular match. Here's an interesting stat and fact. We didn't have fucking phones with pictures and cameras in them, folks. You had to buy a camera. Imagine the horror. So I had to buy a fucking camera, a 35mm, you know, and usually you could get a camera, a decent disposable camera back then for 20 or 30 bucks. What always fucked you in the ass was the amount of money for the film. The 35mm film was always a dick in the ass. It was always somewhere like $5 for like 24 pictures or whatever the fuck. So I'm sitting there with my little camera and my 2 rolls of film, and some ass fuck in the audience behind me starts calling out, "Anyone got film? Anyone got film?" He needed blank film because his camera, like, he didn't have film. And I sold him a fucking roll of a little kid, and I sold this fuck a roll of film for $10, which was probably double the value. Now, henceforth, yes, probably go back in time and not do that and just take more pictures, but what the fuck? I got $10 out of this fuck. So, which was double the rate. So, things you could have done, you know, back then you can't do now, is get twice the money for a fucking roll of film. Okay, the show starts, and we start off kind of interestingly enough with an NWA World Tag Team title match. Tully and Arn versus Sting and Nikita. Look, I was a big fucking Nikita Koloff fan. Everybody at the time was a big Nikita Koloff fan. Now, in retroactive history, all the wrestlers, oh, Nikita was stiff, and Steve didn't know what he was doing. Well, at the fucking time, we liked Nikita Koloff, okay? All these goddamn revisionist fucks, whether it's the wrestlers themselves or the Meltzer fucks, they always want to tell you something that wasn't true. We liked fucking Nikita Koloff. We liked fucking Lex Luger. Sorry, assholes. So we're watching the goddamn show. Sting and fucking Luger. I'm sorry, whatever the fuck. Sting and Nikita. Tully and Arn. It was a good match. It was a tinge disappointing that it was a 20-minute draw, to be honest the fuck with you. They really could have made that a 30-minute draw, and we'll get to that later because the show ran short. So had someone had a pencil and known what the fuck they were doing, they could have added 10 minutes to that match just as easily and given us a little more wrestling for our money. But it was a good match. And like I said, this is Horseman's night out, which is a pattern we're seeing. Look, Tully and Arn are not going to go in there and get a clean pin on Nikita Koloff and Sting, okay? That just wasn't going to happen. But as the champions to go to a draw, a time limit draw, that was like a victory for them. Blah, 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 blah. Now, this was always also starting a thing, a gimmick, and Meltzer's talked about this, where Sting would have all these goddamn matches with people where he would get the Scorpion Deathlock on them and the time limit would run out. It happened at the Clash 1. It happened here. I'm trying to remember if it was Arn or Tully, but he had the fucking Scorpion on one of those guys and the time limit ran out. Next, the fuck match. I did take some pictures of Nikita and Sting with the belts on, by the way. Next match, I think they went from that, if I'm not mistaken, to the U.S. Tag Team title match, which was the Fantastics versus the Midnight Express. Once again, a little bit odd going from a World Tag Team title match to the U.S. Tag Team title match, back-to-back title matches. I think that's what's happened. And it was the Fantastics against the Midnights. I always say Midnights with an S. Bobby and Stan, the best version of the Midnights in my opinion. No offense to Dennis Condrey or Phil Hickerson, if you caught that joke. But I liked the match. It was a good match, and this was the first time I saw a title change. Now, back the fuck then, we used to cheer if you got to see a title change, folks. And we saw the Midnight Express win a title. And now Jim Cornette was put in a fucking straitjacket and suspended in the air like a fuck. And it was a good match. What the fuck else next? Then you had the Tower of Goddamn Doom. I took a bunch of pictures of this thing. Now, you fucks, the most interesting thing about the Tower of Doom is they fucking assembled this weird thing. I think it was suspended above the ring when we got there, and it was quite a sight. And they lowered this fucking Tower of Doom into the goddamn ring, around the ring. They sent poor Tommy Young climbing up there, and he looked like he was gonna die. And the Tower of Doom was shaking around like fuck. I don't know if the TV production does it justice, but the biggest thing with the Tower of Doom was we thought someone would be doomed. I mean, we thought one of the referees, I don't think they had any harnesses on or ropes. But if you look at poor Tommy Young hanging off the edge of this thing, it's pretty scary. And he should have gotten hazard pay. I'm sure he didn't. But the Tower of Doom, it was really convoluted and weird how, like, these fucking doors, like, you're supposed to climb to the fucking top, fight your way to the bottom, and get out. It really made no goddamn sense, because then it's just like a foot race. Like, why don't you just race? But the whole match was designed in order to somehow the fuck, you know, put over Jimmy Garvin and Kevin Sullivan and fucking Precious. And people were into Jimmy Garvin as a babyface. I'm sorry the fuck. Like, people were into it because they felt like they were, you know, being valiant and defending the woman of Precious. And the fans were into it. And back then, you didn't have a lot of women in wrestling. And they weren't fucking Charlotte Flair, Sasha Banks, or Bayley. They were people like Baby Doll and Precious, who were more or less girlfriends, valets, managers, in Miss Elizabeth's case. There was some women wrestlers from time to time, like Misty Blue Sims, but Medusa and the AWA, I mean, the AWA, for all it's worth, was really doing the women wrestlers the most justice of any of the big companies, but there was not a whole lot of women wrestlers in Jim Crockett Promotions, I hate to fucking tell you. So this storyline with Precious was a big effing fucking deal. Okay, I said fucking, not just effing. So, one interesting thing, once again, fucking Meltzer or somebody pointed out, that at the end of this match, the psychology was a little off because Road Warrior Hawk comes back into the ring to attack Kevin Sullivan, and Jimmy Garvin rescues Precious. And I guess I would just say that the idea, the psychology might have been like, you know, we're all brothers. We're all defending the honor of one of our guys' girl. And so that Hawk attacking Sullivan is like an extension of Jimmy Garvin. Like, Hawk is representing Jimmy Garvin's muscle, okay? So the most important thing for Jimmy is to protect his gal, but because he's got this buddy, this muscle-grown fuck, Hawk, who's like such a good friend of his, that Hawk's attack on Sullivan was an extension of him, okay? Now what happened? Then we get the Barry Windham fucking... And of course you have to remember who all the interesting people in that match. Now the most interesting thing was the Powers of fucking Pain were no longer involved in this goddamn thing. So they weren't there. They were off to fucking Vince McMahon cartoon land. So you had this kind of disappointing team of the Russian Assassin, who I think was fucking the Angel of Death from Old Class, and Ivan Koloff, and Al Perez was in this thing. Was it Zbyszko in this thing? It was a weird clusterfuck of a match, to be honest. Mike Rotundo, Kevin Sullivan, Al Perez, Ivan Koloff, and the Russian Assassin. So no Zbyszko, he wasn't there. Although he was still in the promotion at the time, he wasn't really featured a whole lot. Perez was in this. And then the good guys were like Dr. Death. He was always getting shoehorned into these war games and all these other matches that meant nothing. So Steve Williams, the Road Warriors, what the fuck, Jimmy Garvin and Ronnie Garvin. Now turn around to the next match. Barry Windham and Dusty Rhodes had this big father pseudo-son match for the U.S. title. Barry had turned heel on Luger, but Dusty Rhodes was the baby. I'm going to have my barbecues this summer, and my best friend's not going to be there. There was like this big article at Inside Wrestling. Dusty Rhodes said, I'm going to have my barbecues this weekend, and my best friend's not going to be there. It was very dramatic. Their match was not particularly good, to be honest with you. It was a slow, kind of plodding match. Like, Barry as a heel was great, but this match was just like Barry using the fucking claw, which, no offense, but nobody really bought into it or was into the fucking claw hold at this point. And it was just kind of like putting like the claw on Dusty's blotch on his belly and his armpit. And no one this match was not particularly good, but it did have a good ending. I think there was a ref bump, and then Ronnie fucking Garvin comes out, and he looks over the situation. And now you got to remember, Ronnie Garvin was huge in Baltimore, big baby face in Baltimore. And Ronnie's like 7 or 8 months removed from a world title reign himself. And Ronnie comes in the ring, and he pops a little fat Dusty in the face. So Ronnie Garvin turned heel. The place fucking cheered. I hate to fucking tell you. But Ronnie Garvin got a face reaction for a heel maneuver. And Ronnie Garvin was now a heel. Now you got to remember, Ronnie Garvin was a U.S. Tag Team Champion with Barry Windham. So they had like this established buddyship. And later on, like, it was a shocking moment. Like, that was probably the biggest shocker of the whole show, because Ronnie Garvin was just kind of floating around. Now, this would set the precedent for Ron Simmons kind of pseudo turning heel in WCW in '94-ish, before he left the territory, as they used to say. Ron Simmons turned fucking heel after he lost the world title to Vader. And because they don't know what to do with baby faces after they win the world title. What do you do now? You turn heel. There's nothing else to do with you if they're not going to get another world title run. So now we move forth to the main event. It's Luger versus fucking Ric Flair. Now here's the thing. Everyone got their dicks hard over Sting versus Ric Flair at the Clash of Champions. But when people were... I've been Peter Brady there for a moment. People were really getting worked up ever since January, the fucking Royal Rumble, about Lex Luger turning babyface and beating Ric Flair. Like, that was the, 12-year-old booking. Like, okay, like if a 12-year-old was booking the NWA, well, of course Lex Luger is going to beat Ric Flair for the world title, because he's a good guy now, and he's so big and strong, and he looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Rambo. Well, we didn't know all these wonderful things the smart fucks know now, which is, oh, Luger can't wrestle, he has no charisma. We didn't realize that at the time, assholes. We just thought he was big and strong. And my friend's sister was all hot and bothered about fucking Lex Luger. And we all were going to look forward to this goddamn match. Now, from my recollection, the match was like a 10-minute fuckfest, like a 10-minute match, and then this bullshit, spoiler alert, blood call. But what we've discovered later, folks, I think it was through the Conrad Thompson podcast with good old JR or some such fuck, that in fact, the Crockett Promotions workshot fucking what's-his-dick, Ray Iannucci from the Baltimore State Athletic Commission to stop the match on cuts, as they used to say in the WWF. Like Bob Backlund would always lose on cuts but not lose his title, which was a dick in the fucking ass of reality. But basically, Lex Luger looked like he had old Nate in the fucking torture rack, but he has like a trickle of blood. You know, nothing like Kerry Von Erich would have against Jerry Lawler a year and change later, or actually less than that later, 6 months later, at Super fucking Clash 3. Nothing like Don Kernoodle at the fucking Greensboro Coliseum. This blood was minimal, okay? I mean, it looks like your fucking aunt could produce that much blood in her panties, okay? And still get through the family barbecue. So Lex is bleeding. JJ later would, you know, in a shoot, JJ Dillon would say that he actually sliced up Lex with a nice razor blade. A little behind the scenes storytelling there. You could actually see that on camera, where JJ does the nice job like a violin player. And fucking Lex bled, and they stopped the match. Now, the fans, you could hear them in the video, if you have a real video of this thing and not a censored, homogenized network version, you could hear the fans chant bullshit. The fans were upset. They were irate. Very upset and very irate. So, now what do I say? This is how we felt. Now, the folks, the pay-per-view is going 3 hours, 4 hours, with WrestleMania 3, I think, was a solid 3 hours. WrestleMania 4 and 5, I think, were 4-hour pay-per-views. The NWA did a pretty good job of keeping their pay-per-views to 3 hours, which was a great amount of time, okay? 3 hours is plenty of time for a packed show. This show was really like 2 hours and 20 minutes. 5 matches, okay? The NWA tag, the US tag, the Tower of Doom, US title, NWA World title. Now that 5 matches, those big 5, would have been so nicely complemented by like 2 undercard matches, like Larry Zbyszko versus Tim Horner, and maybe take Rick Steiner and Kendall Windham in a one-on-one match and put them on the show. Ooh. Maybe take the Road Warriors out of that fucking Tower of Doom thing, put the Road Warriors against Tully and Art, and switch out, put Sting and Nikita in the Tower of Doom to make that a little more star-studded in as far as individual stars. But it is what it effing is. We had already seen the Road Warriors versus Tully and Arn plenty of effing times, fucking times. But I do like my little concept of Rick Steiner versus Kendall Windham on this show, on the pay-per-view. And like I said, Zbyszko versus Tim Horner. Fill out the card a little bit. Or they could have just had added 10 minutes of Tully and Arn versus Sting and Nikita. Maybe have that go to a 30-minute draw, or even a, dare I say, 45. But I think no matter what you did, or Crockett did, having that god-awful Ray and Iannucci blood spot to end the main event was really shitty booking. That was, I mean, gumshoe booking, if that's the term. But it was very much like, oh, you just fucking... Your father going through a divorce had to fly you in from Rhode Island to Baltimore to see this show, and we're going to reward your efforts, young man, with a fucking bloody tampon finish, okay? Because we can't write a better finish, and Luger's not ready for the belt. So the whole dick in the ass thing was, what the NWA sometimes did was they overestimated their fans' loyalty. Like, you guys are so good, we'll just sit through any bullshit finish. The promoters get cocky, they get arrogant, they think they can have all these goddamn DQs and dusty finishes, or whatever you want to call them, and the fans aren't going to be pissy. Now, sometimes, folks, You do, from what I've been told, not that I've ever pushed the pencil for these puppets, but sometimes you do want to piss off your fan base because you want them to come back for more. Now in 2020, folks, that's having a rule of declining fucking returns. But in 1988, well, you might have been able to get away with it, but we have to remember that the Crockett's did sell a Turner just a few months later, and that rumor that was swirling through the arena turned out to be true. Well, folks, now at the end of the show, I think I can remember, I just sense memory. I remember feeling like we had a great time while we were there. Seeing a U.S. Tag Team title change, the Midnight Express beating the fucking Wessel Dicks, the Fantastics, and I met Bobby Fulton later, nice guy. We did see the Tower of Doom, as weird as it was exciting because it was different. The Ronnie Garvin heel turn was good. That was very good. The actual Barry Dusty match was slow and plodding. Not much chemistry with those two. And the Nikita thing was good, but it was kind of like a forgettable thing. It was just a draw. But overall, we did kind of feel like we left and the show was just getting started, if that makes any goddamn sense. Like we sat through this 2 hours and 20 minutes, but we're kind of like, okay, what's next? Well, nothing. The show's over. Go home. Which to me meant walking as a young man back to a fucking hotel where my dad was. You know, and back in the day, here I am, a little child, walking around Baltimore, going to a hotel, which was pretty impressive by my part, and that I wasn't fucking on a milk carton the next week. Last seen at the Baltimore Arena. What happened to your son? Oh, I flew him in to see a fucking wrestling match with the fucking tampon finish, but he got abducted. But that did not happen. I did get back to the hotel. I told my dad all about the goddamn matches. I think we had a pizza at some point for dinner. That was the old father and son routine. Have a pizza from a box and eat it. And flew back to goddamn Rhode Island. And before you fucking knew it, I was back in Virginia going to school again. So my mother was probably upset, thinking it's a waste of money and effort for me to see this goddamn match, because she felt ripped off that it had a bullshit finish as well. I remember her telling me that she gave the show 2 stars in her Meltzer poll. So there you fucking have it, folks. The NWA Great American Bash 88, if you really think about it, it was the end of times. It was the end. It was like the NWA peaked with their show creatively right before they were fucking done, folks. Like, they didn't have another pay-per-view. It was all Ted Turner from there on in. So if you were a fan of War Games 87, if you were a fan of the old school, the lineage of the Magnum TA, Tully Blanchard, I Quit match, the lineage of even the Rock and Roll Express was the Midnight. Granted, the Rock and Roll Express weren't here. The Fantastics were kind of pseudo taking their place. If you were a fan of the Russians, you know, Ivan Nikita Koloff and Crusher Khrushchev and even Vladimir Pietrov and Baron von Raschke, you had an inkling of Russians. You know, Ivan and the Russian Assassins were here. I'm trying to think if Paul Jones was managing somebody in this fucking thing. Yes, Paul Jones was managing Ivan Koloff and fucking what's his dick, the Russian Assassin. Gary Hart was managing Al Perez. Of course, like I said, Zbyszko was nowhere to be seen. I think he was being managed technically by Gary Hart at that point. Like I said, you know, and I try to call it down the fucking middle. I mean, I was more of an NWA kid. I loved the NWA. This particular show was a little bit of a, you didn't give me my full money's worth, to be honest. I mean, we had high standards for the NWA back then, but they didn't really meet them in this particular case. They did not. Let's not